While it may not seem like it, setting up the stroke in breaststroke is very similar to setting up the stroke in freestyle, butterfly, and backstroke. The principles are the same, so the strategies are the same. Let's find out why the initial phases of breaststroke may look very different, but are actually very similar. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. To move through the water, swimmers have to create propulsion, and in every stroke, they have to position their arms in a way that maximizes the amount of propulsion that they can create. Because water is water and the upper body is the upper body, swimmers will use similar strategies across the strokes. As compared to the other strokes, breaststroke looks the most visually different. But in reality, setting up the stroke is actually very, very similar. Why is that the case? Because of the initial starting positions. Relative to freestyle and butterfly, swimmers will start with the hands together at the beginning of the breaststroke pull, whereas in freestyle and butterfly, the hands are about shoulder width. So in order to set up the stroke in a manner that's similar to freestyle and butterfly, swimmers have to move the hands out until they get wider than the shoulders, just like they do in freestyle and butterfly, and that lateral movement at the beginning of the stroke creates a very different visual feel. However, once the hands are in position, after that, setting up the stroke is actually very similar. This is important because it's really valuable to understand why the lateral motion does happen in breaststroke. And if we realize that setting up the stroke is very similar across all the strokes, we can use very similar strategies to help swimmers learn how to improve the setup of their stroke. Let's check it out. So the first thing to notice here is that the swimmer is going to enter the water or reach full extension with the hands together. Whereas in freestyle and butterfly, those hands are going to be about shoulder width and in some cases a little bit wider. So swimmers are going to have to move from that initial position to a more lateral position so that they can start to set up the stroke. So the first movement is going to be out, and then once the swimmer gets out, once the swimmer's hands are shoulder width or a little bit wider, which is about here, then the process of setting up the stroke can begin. And once we get into this position, we've achieved the setup of the stroke with the hands down, the elbows popped out to the side, and now the swimmer has their forearm facing backwards. And so the initial movement here is just to get into position to set up the stroke, and then from that position, the hands can go down, the elbows can go out, and swimmers can get the forearm facing backwards. So it's this initial piece and this initial slide out of the hands that makes breaststroke pulling look so much different. But once that movement is accounted for, the actual setup of the stroke is very, very similar compared to the other strokes. So if we get into this position here, this looks very much like a butterfly position. The hands are down, the elbows are out and up, and the forearms are facing backwards. And so from this position, it's very difficult to tell if this swimmer is swimming butterfly or breaststroke. And again, once swimmers move the hands out, setting up the stroke is very, very similar with breaststroke and butterfly. If we compare this swimmer here, this is going to be butterfly, and this position that he got into is very, very similar to what we just saw in breaststroke. You can see the chest's up, the hands are pointing down, the elbows are out to the side, and now we're in a position to move water backward. And it's not too surprising considering that butterfly evolved out of breaststroke. It's the same basic strategy is going to be used to set up the stroke and to initiate the pull and to create a lot of propulsion. And so again, breaststroke is no different from the other strokes. There is that initial portion of the stroke where the hands do need to slide out to get into position to match the position of butterfly and freestyle. But then from there, we're getting into this position. This is butterfly and this is breaststroke, and the two positions are very, very, very similar. So again, it's all about sliding out so that the hands can get shoulder width or wider, and then from that position, swimmers can start to pop the elbow out, get the hands down, get the forearm facing backwards, and now they can create propulsion. And so again, setting up the stroke is all about getting as much surface area facing backwards as possible. So swimmers have to go from this fully extended position, and in breaststroke, they have to go from the position where the hands are together and the arms are fully extended, and then they have to slide out, orient the lower arm so it's facing backwards, and now we're in a position where we can create a lot of propulsion. So we'll take a look at another swimmer executing these same skills in a slightly different way. So she's getting full extension out in front, the hands are together, she's got to slide out here, and then she slides out a little bit more abruptly, and then she's getting into that position again. She's going from the hands and the arms facing down towards the bottom of the pool to getting the hands and the lower arms facing backwards so that she can create propulsion. And again, this is very similar to a butterfly position. She's got everything facing backwards, She's using the upper body to create all that propulsion. She's squeezing back and in, and then that's where we're going to get the pull from. And so again, starting with everything together, sliding out, executing the catch, and then getting into those positions. So again, very, very similar to butterfly, very similar to freestyle, because the upper body, the anatomy that we're dealing with as humans, is the same in every case, and the properties of the water are the same, so the same strategies are going to be effective. There's different rules to the stroke, and so we get slightly different variations of what swimmers are going to do. And in the case of breaststroke, as compared to butterfly especially, the big difference is there's going to need to be more of a sliding out in the beginning of the stroke so that swimmers can get into the position where they have the shoulder range of motion and the upper body range of motion to get the lower arm facing backwards. And so that's what we're going to see when they execute that pull and they set up the stroke. So again, starting with the hands together and then sliding things out, and then getting into that position there where the lower arm is facing backwards. So another way to think about it is if you've ever had butterflyers where they actually crash in, their hands hit together, that's basically what a breaststroker is doing. And if you ever see those swimmers, what you'll see is they will slide out and then they'll execute the setup of their stroke and then they'll execute their pull. And so it's basically the same thing. The difference here is that it's intentional in breaststroke, whereas it's more of an error in butterfly. One more swimmer here executing the same skill from a different angle. And so she's got everything together in the beginning. She's going to slide out and then boom, she's in a position where she's got the elbows out, the elbows up, the hands down. She's moved from where her hands and her lower arms are facing down towards the bottom of the pool, slides out and then repositions so that everything is facing backwards. And now she's in a position to create a lot of propulsion to move water backward. And just like with our other swimmers, from here, it's kind of difficult to tell, is this a butterfly or a breaststroker? They're using the same basic strategy. Again, the main difference is this initial position where swimmers have to slide out so that they can get into a good position, and then boom, they can execute the setup of the stroke, they can get ready to create propulsion, and then from that point on, they can apply pressure to the water to send themselves forward. So again, in all the strokes, swimmers are dealing with the same physical properties of the water, they're dealing with the same structure of their upper body, and so they're going to select relatively similar strategies in order to set up the stroke, in order to create as much propulsion as possible. The rules of the strokes are going to require swimmers to use slightly different strategies, but the main component, the main position swimmers are going to get into, something pretty similar like this in every stroke, are going to be very, very similar, because that's what allows swimmers to use their upper body to work with the water to create as much propulsion as possible, which allows them to create as much speed as possible. If you want specific strategies to improve the breaststroke pull, check out the video below.